Welcome to this episode of Washington in Focus. I'm your host TJ Martinell. With me is our reporter Tim Clauser, and it seems like the city of Seattle and the state of Washington have been taking actions recently regarding the use of surveillance camera programs in regards to immigration enforcement. So, Tim, walk me through what the city of Seattle just did.
Yeah, so the city of Seattle has been looking at its surveillance camera programs the last few weeks. Specifically, uh, in the middle of March, Katie Wilson issued this order, which essentially paused a CCTV camera expansion ahead of the World Cup, but also temporarily deactivated the Seattle Police Department's automatic license plate reader systems, also known as ALPRs. A lot of agencies around the state use this technology. It's essentially these cameras. Some people put them on traffic lights. SPD, for example, puts them on all of their vehicles. So essentially, when a cop is driving down the road, it's automatically reading all these license plates and it'll ping the officer and say, hey, this car is owned by someone who is wanted for kidnapping or rape or murder or something else. That way, they don't have to take time to look up individual license plates, and this information is just presented to them. But the state took up this issue in the most recent legislature, um, given concerns recently regarding ongoing immigration enforcement, because there was this concern, and there is evidence to show that federal immigration authorities were using this database because it links between different agencies, not just in Washington, but across the nation. So someone in Seattle could see license plates that someone is reading in North Carolina, for example, if they have the system there. So, in certain cases, federal immigration authorities were looking for license plates that they had targeted and were following them across the nation, whether that be on the East Coast or the West Coast as they flow into Seattle. So, the state, like it does with its other sanctuary state laws, wasn't happy with this and wanted to prevent that. So it set up these new rules with a new state law this year. And Seattle and other agencies are kind of responding to that. Well, Katie Wilson in Seattle, their Democratic Socialist mayor, she, from the get go on the campaign trail last year, said she wasn't a fan of this technology and raised a lot of caution around it. So doesn't seem like she's too upset that they have to temporarily deactivate it. But other agencies like the Spokane County Sheriff's Office, the Pierce County Sheriff's Office, local police departments, they're having to turn off their ALPR programs as well, regrettably because of this new state law. And they're saying that it puts public safety at risk. But at the same time, you have agencies, like I just said, in Spokane, Pierce County, these relatively conservative areas. They're not happy to turn them off. In Seattle, the city council just this past week also passed an ordinance that gives Katie Wilson the power to just turn off these systems in the future for 60 days if she believes that the data potentially could be misused. So she doesn't have to have uh, direct evidence that it is currently being misused. If she and the police chief think that the data may be misused, she can turn it off. So it's a
I,
pretty broad power that they're giving her
I'm
there.
not. I I find it interesting that they gave her the authority to just turn this off, because I'm not. How else can you put this? Is what if they know that there's going to be people there that would be subject to immigration enforcement and know that they're going to be in a certain area and turn the cameras off? I mean, that's that's it's really.
Well,
I just find it interesting that one person gets to make the decision and unilaterally, with no discussion about why that is. So I just see this creating problems.
Well, even then, the state law, the way they wrote it in the past few months and passed it in March, was that these systems cannot be used for immigration enforcement matters. So that wipes that off the table completely. Whether or not there might be a criminal, illegal alien in Seattle or not, the systems can't be used for that. I think the real concern here is that certain areas might look at this technology through a political lens and decide to turn it off for that reason. And this ordinance isn't just the one that they passed this week in Seattle that gives Mayor Katie Wilson this power, it's not just construed to immigration matters. She also, well, not she, the city council set it up so Katie Wilson could also posit if she thinks that the data is being used to track people getting abortions or seeking puberty blockers and other gender affirming care that transgender individuals use. And specifically, she turned off an existing CCTV camera in Seattle that was facing a reproductive health care facility. So it's not just, while immigration might be underneath the spotlight right now with the Trump administration in power, and that's not to say that he hasn't been talking
Yeah,
about policies that impact transgender people,
yeah.
but it's the ability to use these powers through a
I
political
think
lens.
it's good for people. Sorry, guys. I think it's good for people to know that we have a state law that allows basically, uh, if a kid, an underage boy or girl, um, supposedly identifies as a runaway, they can basically seeking gender affirming care, that they can go to a shelter and they don't have to report them to the police, or sorry, to the police. Nobody can report it to the parents. They can basically disappear. So the turn off the cameras is a great way for people not, if they're looking for their kid, or if they're, I just see this being, because they're saying that they don't want people tracking abortions or gender affirming care, whatever they call it. But in our state, this involves children. And so how and they may be accompanied by somebody who's not their parents, and their parents might not be aware of what's going on. And as Jamie Peterson, a Democrat majority leader in the Senate, said, that parents don't have a right to know that this stuff is going on. So when you connect all these pieces, that's really what we could potentially be looking at, is they're not allowing surveillance cameras to be on because it could be showing kids being taken to these places without parental notice or consent, and accompanied by somebody who's not a legal guardian of it in any way.
I think it's important to put it into context too. I mean, for Seattle, for example, you have these automatic license plate readers mounted to, I believe, every SPD vehicle. These are investments that taxpayers have already paid for that are providing substantial benefits to Seattle and the surrounding area. I mean, they're finding missing people, they're finding murder suspects, they're able to prosecute these crimes because they're finding these people. And you think it's just a few cameras, it's not a big deal. You think if you have hundreds of these cameras around the city that are reading these license plates and retaining this data for a few weeks to a month or so, I mean, that's saving officer time, money that would go to the overtime budget that you would otherwise have to spend on dozens of officers, say more than that, scattered across the city doing this work. You think you drive down the road, you might pass 100 cars. How much time do you have to search 100 different license plates in your car while you're driving down the road? It's not really feasible. They might have done it in the past, but it's not as efficient anymore. So you're taking away a resource that taxpayers have already paid for, that's providing them a benefit, and now it's just going to sit there underused, and you're going to see prosecutions and arrests decrease.
I think what's going to be interesting also is to see how the surveillance camera programs are later used, how they're expanded to apply to other things.
I think a lot of these pauses, like we're seeing in Seattle and Spokane and Pierce County, like I said, I think they are going to be temporary. This isn't likely to be a long term thing. They're trying to set up their systems to conform with these new rules. A lot of areas had their data retention set up so it would retain data for up to a month. I'm looking at the state final bill report for this law that they passed this past session, and it limits data retention to 21 days. So they need to make sure that their policies are in line, that they're not sharing this data with agencies that they're not supposed to. But I think that once they get this handled, they will turn these systems back on. But they're going to be operating to a lesser degree than they were before, and that is going to come with consequences. So I'm interested to see how this plays out, especially with uh, the Washington Sheriffs and Police Chiefs Association president, John Knowles, he's in Spokane, uh, how he might work with other sheriffs and police chiefs across the state to come back to lawmakers next session and potentially propose a revised bill that kind of offers a compromise. But it will be interesting going forward to see to what degree these systems are used and if those uses change over time.
Yeah, we'll definitely want to keep an eye on this. So we appreciate your coverage, Tim. Listeners can keep up with this and other stories at thecentersquare.com. I'm your host, TJ Martinell. Thank you for listening to this episode of Washington in Focus.